What's up, and welcome back to Voth Quality Creative. This is the last installment of the kids' play area in our backyard, and to make this project, I decided to only use found materials and materials that I had left over from other projects. So you can see that I went for a pallet run, and I found some extra plywood lying around. I'm also trying to get a suntan as I work on this mud kitchen. The first step was to break down the sheets of plywood to make the skeleton of the cabinet. This isn't exterior grade, so I'll see how long this lasts outside. I'm using plywood to have a solid surface for when I add the pallet wood to create a more finished look. I really like using these corner clamps when I'm constructing a box to make sure that the corners are exactly 90 degrees and that everything is square. And here I'm finishing the exterior skeleton of the cabinet. Those screws will get covered up by pallet wood later. I'm adding a partition to add strength to the cabinet, as well as serve as mud storage and organization for plates and bowls. I stepped away for a few seconds and it looks like a new tenant moved in. Having to work around this girl's new room, I added a couple of blocks to hold the shelf in place while I secured it to the cabinet. This is starting to look like a solid base to add details to later. I cannibalized a dresser / changing table I made several years ago and added a backing to the cabinet. When adding the partition, one of the screws blew out of the side. I'll be painting the inside, so I'll add wood putty and cover this with paint. Not sure why I'm measuring the sink bowls now. I'll have to redo this later, but I'm sure I'm trying to get a gauge of where these will be. I started making a kick plate, but later I decided to redo this with treated lumber, since it will be touching the ground. It's starting to look like something. Now it was time to break down all of the pallets I collected a few weeks ago. I'm sure my neighbors will be happy. I think I only got one complaint. With each pallet, I needed to have a different method to ensure I was able to keep as much material as possible. Some of these pallets are littered with nails, while others are really easy to break down. My hammer, circular saw, and brute force were my best friends when it came to this part of the project. And here is one of those pallets where I just decided to work around all of those nails. I didn't even want to get into that. And I think these are the pallets that I ended up using the wood from. The wood turned out really nice, and after putting it through the planer, it came out really clean. After breaking everything down, I was left with several piles of wood that could be used, some that needed attention, a throwaway pile, and lots of nails. After putting everything through the planer, here you can see how nice the wood is starting to look after it's cleaned up. I'm starting to lay out the pallet wood to see how I want the top and sides of the cabinet to look. I decided to go with a V pattern, so I'm cutting each piece at a 45-degree angle. When I make a backsplash, it will mirror the cabinet top and make a diamond where they meet. And now with the top pieces cut, I can glue and nail them to the surface. I know I'm definitely going overboard for a mud kitchen here. My little dude saw what I was working on and wanted to help. I thought it'd be a good opportunity to help build something that he'll be playing with later. After an initial jump, he became a pro in no time. I always love having my kids around to help me with these projects and hype me up when I need some encouragement. Once all of the pieces for the top were secured, I went around the edges with a router to make everything flush. Only a couple of the edges blew out. I can always fix that later. The top is really looking great, but here is one of those spots where it's not looking so well. I'll definitely patch that. Off camera, I cut trim pieces out of the same pallet wood to cover up any of the plywood edges. This will also tie into the boards on the side. I decided against a 45-degree detail on the side to make my life a little bit easier. I also didn't want to run out of material. And here I'm securing everything with a lot of glue and brad nails. Here you can see the treated lumber I opted out for the kick plate. I'll cover this with some pallet wood trim. I secured the cabinet to the treated lumber base, and will cover the screws with putty before painting. I flipped the cabinet over to finish the other side, as well as add the trim to the kick plate. Adding this piece hides the remaining treated lumber and really makes the cabinet come together. Now I can finish the front with the rest of the trim to hide any plywood. And I'm not being shy with wood glue or brad nails here. Once the bottom trim was secured, I was able to cut the remaining pieces of the front-facing trim to size and install them. Since I'll be painting this with whitewash, I really wanted to go around the edges and make sure everything was clean and the glue was wiped up. After adding all of the pallet wood, this mud kitchen is starting to look really great. Now it was time to give everything a good sanding and fix any imperfections and mistakes that I made along the way. I also cut any of the really harsh edges to make sure no bumps and bruises would happen. The kids can always find a way to get hurt. And now I can remeasure where these sink bowls go. I decided that my level was a good distance from the front of the cabinet top. This also allowed me to have a really consistent place to measure for the bowls. I started cutting the holes for the sinks with my largest hole saw, but I found out quickly that this wasn't going to be the best option. It was time to bust out the big guns, or at least the more appropriate gun. And then I could test the fit to make sure that I did a good job. This is starting to look fun. Now it's time for a song break.
Bringing this baby home.
Blue.
Oh yeah, that is blue.
Red.
Ooh, and what's on top? What's that?
Baby.
Is it a flamingo? A baby flamingo?
Baby Paul.
Can never miss an opportunity to sing with Freddie the Flamingo from Top. Once I established the location for the sink bowls, I could then find a location for the faucet. I'm using a bar faucet that only has an on and off switch. The water will be coming from the hose, and this makes installation much easier. Time to test it out. We're definitely going to have some really good tea during our tea party with our mud biscuits. I could then move on to painting. I got some really inexpensive exterior paint and started painting the interior of the cabinet. I didn't want to hide all of the detail of the wood grain on the front and sides of the mud kitchen. That would kind of defeat the purpose of all the work that I put into this thing. I watered down the paint with about a 1-to-1 ratio and painted the sides and the front. After that, I could wipe everything down with a rag. And for the top, I just went with several coats of a matte polyurethane. And once that was dry, I could then reinstall the faucet for its final permanent home. I could then add some plumber's tape to all of the threads before tightening on the faucet hose. I also purchased an attachment that screws onto the faucet hose and allows to connect any ordinary garden hose. Here I'm attaching some supports that I can connect the backsplash to that I made off camera. I used all of the offcuts from the countertop as well as some additional pallet wood to make the backsplash. I then painted everything the same as the top and added some yellow paint to the missing knot on one of the pieces. To finish everything off, I added a shelf. I was starting to run out of extra pieces, but Luckily, I had just enough to complete this project. And don't worry, I cut the support pieces flush. I think my daughter really enjoyed it. And after finishing the mud kitchen, the kids' play area is finished. I think they'll really have a great time with their dedicated space for picnics, gardening, and getting messy. Feel free to check out some of my other project videos. And if you've made it this far, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.